So, hi, I'm making this video and it's in relation to British elections. And, this has appeared on my X today about Sky News allowing a platform to an unelected Reform mouthpiece to spread his propaganda live on your TV station, slap bang in the middle of a police investigation, to blame all the other parties for a murder, Anne Widdecombe, the late Anne Widdecombe now, and making what is horribly reminiscent of a fascist stab in the back myth speech. What the hell do you think you're doing? Have you taken leave of your senses? Well, yes, I think Britain has actually taken leave of its senses through a thoroughly Zionist-controlled, infiltrated media. We know that Reform is the Zionist choice. They have been backing far-right parties directly in Britain. That is not a myth or a conspiracy theory. I can leave you solid links to it, that why they're backing these far right groups. I'm just looking because I know that I did have a link to it somewhere. I've got that many links up, it's quite hard. But yeah, they are supporting Reform, and Reform led by Nigel Farage as well, who, we have to say he was a childhood Nazi. I'm sure he's still a Nazi in spirit, and he's very keen to go for full-out war against Russia. He wants to scrap our human rights. I mean, I'd like British people to imagine, and I think it's very hard for British people to imagine what it's like to live in a country with no human rights at all. You've got no resource to the ECHR, no resource to the ICC or the ICJ, even if Farage wants us out of them all. And so basically, you're at the mercy of the whole country, will be at the mercy of Nigel Farage, and he's talking about revoking citizenship to people who only have one grandparent born in Britain, and he's talking about unleashing ICE, the American ICE, onto British streets and towns and cities. He's talking about ending the benefit system, forcing 14-year-olds to work. Okay, and it's, what he's got planned for this country, it is terrible. And also, how many forced conscriptions to go and fight in Ukrainians' World War One style trenches, where they're forcibly sending teenagers in Ukraine there. Is that what's going to be happening in Britain? And so we really do need to think very, very carefully about Reform and what they've got planned, and the Tories, Labour Reform, and to some extent similar as well, the Lib Dems. And I think, looking at the choices, political choices, the only viable ones are your party, Workers' Party, and the Green Party at the moment. The Green Party, I think Zach Polanski is genuine, is authentic, is great. But unfortunately, the Green Party is full of Zionists as well, which they have refused to even discuss at their last conference. The debate on that was filibustered, of including Zionists in the party, which I find very disturbing, considering how easily socialists and even Holocaust survivor Jews were kicked out of the Labour Party on grounds that they're socialist and do not support Zionism. So, the risk is that, yes, the Green Party could get in, but then who knows how long it would be before there'd be a vote of no confidence against Zach Polanski, and suddenly a hard right Zionist has taken his place. So, personally, and I hate to say it because I would love for the Greens to have won, or to be, the next leadership of Britain. The risks of the Zionist level of infiltration are just too great. And so, yeah, Workers' Party or your party, are about our only options. But unfortunately, whether or not we can trust the results of a general election are another thing, and this is what I'm going to be covering in this video. I apologise for my voice at the moment, absolutely full of hay fever. I've had it really bad this year, so please bear with me. So my problem with the British electoral process, besides, you know, having fair representation of the British people, which has been a long ongoing thing, there are other things that people do need to be aware of, and to taking into account the levels of blatant criminality that are going on in this country right now, and especially with what this government's doing, you know, saying it's proscribing the Iranian military, basically, which I would say is an illegal step, considering that Iran has been illegally attacked and was not the aggressor. And in Keir Starmer's words, in reference to Israel, I repeat his words to him, Iran does have that right to defend herself. And, you know, and let's face it, it's not including withholding water, fuel and food from the Israeli people. And it has not included indiscriminately bombing every building in Israel in which civilians are living. So I think the government's decision to proscribe a part of Iran's national military, you know, which is, it's like Britain has the SAS, doesn't it? You know, a country could prescribe against the SAS, but if you're in war, you've been attacked illegally, and then the people that are on the side of the attack are then prescribing parts of your military as terrorists. And you're looking at what Israel's military is doing in Palestine and Lebanon, what they've done in Syria, what they're doing to Iran now. That's not terrorism. So, you know, you're talking like absolute crime, and they're talking about prosecuting British people, putting people in prison for 14 years because they've shared a post that's sharing information from that's been issued by, say, Iran's military. And apparently ignorance is no defence. You know, the fact that you didn't know this group had been prescribed, or you didn't know that this post had originally come from this place, you thought it'd come from here, but actually no, originally it was from Iran's military, and suddenly you're facing prison. And is it any wonder in that case why they're trying to deny trial by jury? So we're talking about an absolute criminal government who are themselves terrorists now by the very fact of the way they're abusing British law. They're abusing their powers of office to criminalise, with intent to criminalise, innocent people in Britain who are righteously standing up for international law and human rights. That is our right to do that. The government has no right denying our human rights or our allegiance to international law. So, you know, bearing that in mind, I think it's very important that people understand the information that I'm going to share now about Britain's electoral system. Now, I was first alerted in 2019 because of the 2019 results, which I was very, very suspicious of, that Boris Johnson won by a landslide and, you know, Jeremy Corbyn lost by a landslide. It just didn't make sense. And I wrote a blog about it, but then this guy Ricky Coxon, he wrote an absolutely brilliant blog. You know, he went into all the data. As he says, he's a data nerd, and he goes through it, and I'll leave you the link. But, you know, he focuses on the postal vote and the fact that it apparently doubled, though they're saying it didn't, but we have no direct evidence of whether it did or didn't. But nonetheless, it definitely was the postal vote that gave Tories the edge and won them the seats, and he goes through all of it here. You know, like the postal vote represented 18.8% of the electorate in Bridgend, and that's so 24% of the final result. Okay, so only just under 20% of the electorate of the electorate at Bridgend voted by post, but they took 24% of the final result. So the Tories won by a majority of 1,157, and this was across the board, and he goes through it, and going back a couple of days before the election, Laura Kussenberg mentioned something about Labour being down in the postal votes, and we also have Dominic Raab here talking about, oh well, you know, we've got inside information, postal votes not looking very good for Jeremy Corbyn, and that was 10 days before the election. Which, how do they know the postal vote results, how they're going 10 days before, when they're not supposed to have any idea? The postal votes aren't supposed to be opened until, 10:30 on the day of the general election. And so he says, well, how did they know? Surely postal votes are kept under lock and key by the local authority, right? Right, well, actually, no. Postal votes aren't even counted by the election counting team at the local authority. They are sent away to an outsourced company in over 90% of cases. Yeah, I didn't know that here either. So, and this is from Kelly Tumber, Electoral Services Manager, London Borough of Hounslow. And we are really pleased with the progress made so far. 17,000 postal returns, and we haven't had to open a single envelope, scan a single form, search for storage space, or employ any temporary staff. It takes the scanning bureau only a matter of hours to open, sort and scan the forms, freeing up staff to deal with enquiries efficiently, providing a better customer service to the residents of Hounslow. So, who was the main company tasked with collating the postal votes? A company called Hallarose. Oh, Hallarose. Oh, no, wait, we can't ask it anymore. Anyone at Hallarose, because the company was suddenly dissolved within days of the election. So it doesn't exist anymore. And this was given illegally, okay, to, because it's like, I wonder who owned Hallarose. I introduce you to a company called Idox Group Limited, and the main interest of Idox is oil and gas, okay? And a quick Google of Idox seems to suggest that former Conservative MP and current Tory Life peer Beattie Lilly was made director in 2012 and owns at least 500,000 shares in the company. He even declares it in the Register of Member Interests in Parliament. So again, you know, he's part of the Cayman Isles, gas oil companies, and there he is. So Lilly joined Idox in 2012, and by May 30, 2013, they boasted on their website that they had control of elections and voter registration across the UK, an astonishing feat given the timescales involved. By 2019, Idox and its subsidiaries had contracts with 90% of local authorities to provide postal voting services, ranging from printing and posting the ballot packs to verifying returned votes to storing all the signatures from the application forms and return statements. Check out their services here. Okay. So, and Idox was given a contract, to run the postal vote services just before the general election in 2019. And it was illegal because it should have been put out to tender. But no, it was just rushed through. So, according to former Idox employees, the way it works is that if you apply for a postal ballot, then IDOC scans your signature and date of birth into their system, and just before an election they send out the ballot papers. You complete them and send them back. They arrive at IDOCs and are scanned into their system, where their software attempts to match your ballot signature and date of birth to that on their records from your original application. If it matches, they digitally count your vote. If something doesn't match or is unreadable, then a scanned copy is passed to a human employee to check. The human employee is often working from home and confirms or rejects the signature, date of birth, or even clarifies which candidate has received the vote, and in some cases, and then moves on to the next scan. The postal vote totals for each candidate are then sent electronically to each authority, where they can input the paper ballot numbers too, so even the adding up is outsourced. The Electoral Commission has confirmed in an FOI request that a private company supplies result collation software. So it also sells a canvassing tablet app to political parties. This would be used when door knocking, and the canvasser, after conversing with the tenant, would record who they would be voting for. This data could be built up over time and linked to external data sources such as the electoral roll, public records, and even social media. Now IDOCs would know who plans to vote and for which party, along with having the signature and DOB of every postal voter. What is stopping them from changing votes or making some votes up from return ballots? What is stopping them from delaying the postal vote so a bad voter gets their ballot papers too late? If this is how it works, then imagine the possibilities of fraud and gerrymandering that it offers. How do we know the employee isn't rejecting correct papers or approving incorrect ones? How do we know their digital system has sufficient levels of accuracy? How do we know IDOCs didn't record a vote from an unreturned ballot paper by simply adding one to the votes? How do we know the result collation software isn't rigged? Of course, we could ask IDOCs or the local authorities or the Electoral Commission for a full independent forensic audit and process of the system. Except the local authorities in the Election Commission have admitted that they don't actually know how accurate IDOC systems are, so we just have to take their word for it. This isn't very reassuring due to the fact that, according to court documents obtained in Malta, IDOC software has a 20% match error rate. Okay, well, that 20% match error rate could have got, a Tory MP into Parliament in 2019, because we saw that 20% of the people, the 20% postal vote in one place basically formed 24% of the overall vote, and that candidate won by less than 2,000 votes. So do we trust them? Do we trust corporations, and they are global corporations? Do we trust them? And we know they're all behind Israel, they're all behind the Zionists and the WEF and the Great Reset. Do we trust them and the people that they hire to be running our election? And no independent observers. So, as I say, this is all very disturbing. I'll leave you this link and please do read it, because it's very, very important. We're talking about the one little bit of power that people in Britain have, that as part of a democracy, which is to vote for a party of our choice to govern us, then this is super, super important. And it does relate to our national security. Okay, I'm not talking about security for a criminal, actually terrorist government that's been supporting and engaging in terrorist actions against innocent people abroad, and also terrorist actions against the people of Britain, certainly economic terrorism. Then no, we cannot just sit back and not think, not take action, not be aware of this now. So with all these polls that have been out putting reform as the top choice for the next government of Britain, I mean, I don't believe those polls for 1 second. And I know just from the turnouts at reform gatherings and far-right demos, yeah, there's a few thousand people there, but nothing like the amount of people that are out supporting Palestine, that are out campaigning against, they don't want war with Russia. The vast majority of this country does not want war with Russia, but Nigel Farage does. Nigel and most of the people in this country does not support Zionist action in Palestine or anywhere else. They don't like the increasing level of Zionist control that we're now witnessing over our own government and within our media, where actually the bulk of the British public are marginalised in favour of, say, the BOD, the Israel lobby. Okay, they have direct access to our MPs and direct influence in changing government policy compared to the rest of the public who have virtually none. So this is my FOI request to my local constituency. And I said, please could you confirm or deny that electoral services, including collating and counting of postal votes, are outsourced to a private company? And if so, which company? Okay. So they sent me this letter back, and honestly, it is so disturbing. It's very, very disturbing, and I think everybody needs to take note of it. We need to be asking questions, because we cannot, at this moment, we cannot trust the results of a general election. That is a fact, okay? And so here we are. So there's my reply. Sorry, that's my question. And then we've got here our response. We can confirm, as per section 1 brackets 1 of the Freedom of Information Act 2000, the council does not hold the information requested. The information you have requested is held by the returning officer rather than the council. The returning officer is not classed as a public authority under the Freedom of the Information Act. Accordingly, all information held by this officer as part of their statutory duty is not held for FOI purposes. With this said, in order to be helpful and to assist you with your inquiries, I am happy to confirm that postal votes are all returned to the council where they are open, verified and counted by staff appointed by the returning officer. So you've got one person, okay, who is the returning officer, who runs the general election for the council, right? So he or she is employed to run the GE, and it is up to them who they recruit to help them in the counting of the votes, sending out postal votes. It's all down to one person, and he or she is not answerable to a Freedom of Information request. So when you look at, say, the different constituencies around Britain, then all it takes is for Zionists, with all their power and influence within British politics, going right up to the government itself, to 10 Downing Street, okay, that are we really sure that the returning officers aren't somehow manipulated by Zionists, and that they aren't hiring people who are Zionists or who want a particular result for the vote? And so next minute, Britain's suddenly governed by absolute total fascism. I mean, we're talking about a man that wants to even remove maternity leave. He wants to stop women from going in the army. He wants to slash everything. Basically, he wants to do a doge on Britain. He wants to mirror everything Trump's done in America. He wants to mirror that in Britain. So, we we are talking about serious consequences for people's lives, and especially the NHS. He wants that privatised, so that how much healthcare is going to be denied to people. I do not believe that the bulk of the British people really are going to vote for somebody who wants to remove their healthcare purely on strength of the fears posed and worry posed by, what is it, less than 50,000 immigrants allegedly arriving in Britain on boats every year, which is actually a tiny minority compared to the amount of immigrants that are brought in by corporations to work in Britain, because corporations can now bring their workforces in from abroad, that a lot of people don't know that, you know, and the amount of rich people that will be coming into Britain with that suddenly has no human rights. I mean, this Bill of Rights, nobody's even seen it. You know, why should a few men be able to get together and decide what rights British people should have? And don't forget that Bill of Rights was first done by penned by David Cameron with his convicted paedophile senior advisor, Patrick Rock. So what are those rights going to be? Well, I can tell you now. It'll be, have you got money? You've got rights. Have you got no money? You've got no rights. Are you brown-skinned? Are you, the child of an immigrant? And I've only got one grandparent born, or I've only got one grandparent born in Britain, then you don't get full rights under our Bill of Rights. Or you might suddenly be deported. You might have your British passport removed from you, and you have to get your passport of the country that your other grandparent was born in. You know, these are the things that he's talking about, and we need to take them seriously. You know, this idea of, oh, they'll never do that. You know, I heard that for years from people when I was explaining what risks are going to be in the future if people vote Brexit and for the Tories again. Oh no, of course they're never going to do that. Well, of course they have done that, and 10 times worse. So we do need to take these people seriously when they say what they're going to do, and they're banding Farage about now, and even on Sky News giving a platform to Farage, and the BBC constant. We know that they're all Zionist assets. The BBC, Sky News, the majority of British mainstream media are Zionist assets. And all right, maybe in the past that was just, well, you know, Zionism, it's a Jewish thing. But now we've seen what the Zionists are capable of, how heartless they are, how cruel, how actually evil of what they've done to the children and people of Gaza and Palestine and Lebanon now, just kicking 1 million people out of their homes. Well, do not think for 1 minute that they won't quite happily kick us out of our homes. And we do need to understand that if this country, which it will under Nigel Farage, commit to war against Russia on the Ukraine front lines, okay, then the first thing that'll happen on announcement of war with Russia will be martial law. And I'll leave the link. You need to look what happens under martial law, okay? They are at liberty. The government can remove property. The military can come into your home and take whatever it likes. Who knows? It might include taking our children. And who will be the military in Britain enforcing martial law in the event of war, when all our forces will be out being killed on the front lines in Ukraine, while who's going to be holding the guns here in Britain? Ex-IDF? We've got 2,000 ex-IDF soldiers in Britain right now, right? Ex-IDF mercenaries, Ukrainian Nazis, ISIS, who knows? We need to think about this, because I tell you now, if this government can feel so threatened by the British public holding up a placard saying I support Palestine action, to the extent that they're arresting 81-year-old people, blind people, pensioners, and putting them in prison for 6 months, or possibly even 14 years, for saying that you support this proscribed group, right? That's how paranoid this government is that it can't even tolerate a pensioner stood there with a placard saying, I support Palestine action. But we're expected to tolerate this level of threat against our personal welfare, our children's welfare, and even against our own property. No, this is war. There has been a war declared against every non-Zionist person in Britain. That's the fact of it. There is no other fact. Okay? And then we find out that there's one person controls our election, not the council. They have all the information you've requested by the returning officer. And, they're not classed as a public authority. Why is somebody who is not classed as a public authority running our elections and have control about who counts the votes? They employ the staff to count the votes. And that we find that actually they can just reach out to to a private corporation to come and do all the votes, to count the votes, even supply staff for the polling station and even supply canvassers. This is really serious, and we need some serious questions being asked by people in office. Now, I've contacted Jeremy Corbyn about this. He's not said a bloody thing, and maybe he does not understand. He just cannot grasp the fact of what level of crime we are now living under by criminal authorities who are prepared to commit crimes. And the Tory party said openly that they were prepared to commit crime to get Brexit done. Well, I do believe to this very day that they committed the crime of a rigged election to get Brexit done in 2019. And that is a very, very serious offence, considering the amount of damages that the British people have suffered directly through Brexit, through being lied to as well, and by the very man who they're now saying is going to be the next Prime Minister. Well, apparently, no, he's done for now because of this scandal. But I tell you now, he won't be done for. Okay? He won't be done for. He will be standing still. So, we need to put hope out of the window. We need direct action, direct accountability about who controls our elections and the transparency, you see. Because if there's no transparency, then we have to assume that there is crime being committed here. So, I'm sorry to share this news because it is very, very disturbing. And but what can we do? Except confront it and demand that no, sorry. We want independent observers. We want to know who the staff are, what companies are being used to count our elections and to run the postal vote. We need to know exactly what is going on.